Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Meg Heaton, and over the almost 30 years that I wrote for the Hudson Star-Observer, I did a lot of stories about the the Hudson Area Public Library, many about the great programs and services they offered the community, but equally as many, unfortunately, about how they have historically been underfunded. Library administrators have been very creative over the years, making things work despite the ongoing budgetary challenges. But it appears the issue is getting to a crisis level. My guests today are here to talk about the library's budget crisis, and they are acting directors Shelley Tougas and Madeline Page. Welcome to you both.
Thanks so much.
Let's start kind of with the problem, the basic problem. The library's facing a budget crisis. What does that mean in terms of cuts or how the library is going to function?
So there are three things that play a role in this. One is, do we return to the staffing levels of 2019? We have unfilled position. Do we restore cuts that we've made to the collection and technology? And do we implement a staff retention and recruitment study? We do those three things at our current funding levels. Our reserves are gone, and we will be closing up to 3 days a week in July of 2022. So that's just not burying the lead. That's where we're at.
Yeah, and that would be far more than cuts than we've seen in the past. Is that correct?
Correct. It is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What's the history with the library that's led up to this point? As I've said, this has been an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, it's actually quite an interesting story from a policy level and a library level. We formed a joint library, and there are only 28 of those in the state. We have 380 libraries. And in 2003, community leaders came together because the library was underfunded and it wasn't at the quality people wanted and deserved. If we formed a joint library, we would be able to pool resources and have a better, stronger library. So Hudson, the city, the town of Hudson, and the village of North Hudson did that. And St. Joe joined the year after. And they had a written agreement. And the point was, in writing, to substantially increase funding to the library. Substantially increase funding. Right away, they started changing the agreed upon formulas because they started going, well, this is a little more than we want to spend. So it got off on the wrong foot to begin with. And the big hit happened in 2012, which we can talk about. I just wanted to point out that when we became a joint library, we went from being a small library to a very large library. Our service population right now is 30,500 people. That makes us the 32nd largest library in the state. So we are in the top 10% of libraries in the state in terms of size. We serve 1/3 of all of St. Croix County residents. So I think that gives some perspective. People think of us as the Hudson Library, but we are the Hudson Area Library, and we incorporate those other communities, and they are our patrons. This is their library. We are not the Hudson Library. So that was a big change, and it made the stakes on a different level because of the size.
Not to mention the fact that you're connected statewide with the Moore library system, and the services have increased over that period of time as well, right?
Yes. Madeline works a lot with Moore specifically, and she could speak to the efficiencies that we've gained and the additional resources for our patrons through that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We're part of a consortium of 50 libraries. So we belong to the Moore Consortium. And it just makes a world of difference. When you get a Hudson Library card, you have access to the collections at all 50 of those libraries across Wisconsin. So we're able to borrow and lend materials, and it just has increased all of the different offerings we can make to our patrons. So
absolutely, absolutely. What's needed and what's the bottom line here for taxpayers? I know you made your presentation at the City Council, right?
Yes.
And
So I've been able to visit with some of the leaders in the communities, and of course, our board has been up to speed on this. And to do those things next year in 2022, the things that I mentioned, restore those cuts, the retention and recruitment study, and what am I leaving out? Oh, fill the position we've had open. We basically would need a 48% increase out of the gate, which is huge. So what we did after one of our early discussions is say, let's scale back. What can we get by with? And we sort of landed at 30%. So we would need a 30% increase to do those goals to a partial degree, with the understanding that if those increases aren't sustained, we're going to slide back and be where we are now again in a few years, because we do have to accomplish those three things, and soon.
And the funding would come through property taxes
Right.
collected?
I know we will probably talk about this, but library funding is a lot more complicated than you would think. State funding doesn't generally come to the local libraries. That's for the library systems, like Madeline talked about. That goes to more. We are primarily funded, and all libraries are primarily funded through their county or their municipality, or both, depending on the structure of your library. And here, our property taxpayers in the village and the two towns and the city of Hudson are paying the library through their city taxes. We get some county funding if people who don't have a library come to us. The county reimburses us for their use, and they do that with other libraries as well.
Okay. And if I understand correctly, I was looking at the presentation that you made. I mean, of the 380 libraries that you mentioned in the state, 361 of them get more funding than we get. And by comparison, the funding in Hudson is about $23.70 as compared to the state average of funding of $54.56, more than twice as much as
Could
we
I
do.
share that screen quickly just to
Yeah.
show people that chart? Because I think that's a helpful thing to look at. Here we go.
And that's been part of the problem for a big part of the problem for a long time, how underfunded we are.
Yes, and for people who've really followed this issue through the years, they've probably seen these numbers before, and unfortunately, they have not changed, and they've actually gotten a little bit worse. So the per capita funding, looks at the libraries in our region. As you can see, we're just below Menominee. They are in a similar situation, and the average is about double, 54 something. And then the other community libraries around us are up and up and up until Roberts is at the highest level.
Which is ironic. Roberts is at the highest level. And that's one of the newest libraries in the area too, right?
It is. Somerset also has a new building. So there's a couple of libraries that have very lovely new facilities.
Exactly. Since this hit happened in 2012, how have you been managing over these 9 years? I mean, that's a long time to operate like this. In that new building where you were trying to build, you know, your programming has increased, I know that. The circulations, you know, the numbers have gone up. How have you managed that?
Well, is it okay? I guess it might make sense if we talked about what happened in 2012.
Yeah.
First, just for the background. In 2012, it was discovered that the communities were not paying the library the mandatory minimum funding levels. So the state does have sort of layers of protection to make sure libraries don't get hammered in budget cuts. And one of those is they have a minimum funding level, and it's set by what a county tax is. And you have to pay enough to get exempt from that county tax. If you don't, your taxpayers end up paying that county tax. So it's a better deal for a municipality to meet that minimum. Well, We weren't doing that in 2012. And the library was shorted $415,000. That's more than half of what our municipal funding is right now. The dollars were huge. And people always ask, like, well, why did that happen? Was it an oversight? All those key players are gone. They're not here. But it looks like, and my understanding is that there were changes to the funding laws in 2011, 2013, that legislative session. And it went from the maintenance of effort was you could pay no less than the average of the prior 3 years. And they changed it to you had to meet the county exemption to get out of paying the county tax. So it went from the 3-year average to get out of the county tax to this minimum level to get out of the county tax. And a lot of people didn't follow it or know it, or it wasn't communicated well at the state level. I don't know. All we know is we didn't get it. And it was an enormous amount of money. And it wasn't the greatest time in the economy, for sure. And it was going to be such a huge burden to the 4 communities that the legislature actually stepped in and crafted new legislation. And they removed joint libraries from that formula that all the other communities around us pay and gave us that 3-year average, went back to a 3-year average for joint libraries only. So 28 systems have really been penalized and suffered financially because of what happened here. Unhappy librarians in the state of Wisconsin refer to it as the Hudson solution. And we do not have a lot of fans because that happened.
And was that a permanent change? I mean, or was it supposed to run out after a certain amount of time, or?
It was a permanent change, and just to joint libraries. So all of our neighbors are living under different funding requirements.
Is there any talk about changing that back or removing the Hudson solution?
That's it's a great question. And as we move forward, everything is on the table. I mean, everything. And we've reached out to lawmakers to let them know what's going on here and talk about what we might be able to do. So it's possible we could get some relief at the state level. Those discussions haven't moved very far yet. But like I said, everything's on the table. And if we are able to come up with a solution, this time we don't want it to hurt other libraries.
Sure, yeah, I understand that. In terms of that, then when that happened, how have you managed over the past years since 2012?
Madeline, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the cuts, and we can also sort of tag team the staffing side of it?
Sure. In Hudson, we are so lucky to have amazing support groups. So the Friends of the Hudson Area Library, and then we have the Hudson Area Library Foundation. Both organizations support the library in different ways. We rely very heavily on these support organizations. All of our programming dollars come from funds that the foundation raises for us. We work with the Friends very closely. They've also done fundraising for us as well. And we supplement our book collection through the donations we receive. And then we work with the Friends to sort out the rest of the donations. As far as the book collection, we have made some really heavy hits to our collection budgets. So we are not purchasing as many books or as many DVDs or audiobooks as we used to. It's about a $40,000 difference over the last 10 years. And part of the reason that we've been able to sustain the lending that we can do is thanks to the foundation and thanks to the Friends. And of course, we've made other budget cuts as well. We have a technology budget that has been significantly cut, over $10,000 just since last year. We, with COVID, in a way, we've been able to save some money due to all the virtual training. So we can work with staff to work on staff development virtually, which does save us money. So I think Shelley and I have looked for every possible way to save money. It's always a balancing act, though. I think with COVID, of course, we've had more expenses, unexpected and unanticipated expenses that we were not able to get reimbursed for. So, how have we survived? Shelley, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the staffing?
I think it's just important to talk about the donations, the grants that those groups give us. They cannot fund operations. We have no tax dollars for, like, when we do Candyland, we have escape rooms, we do summer camps, 0 tax dollars. That's all the foundation or the friends. And they don't pay the light bill. They don't pay staff salaries. It's, our crayons, our paper, our computers for special classes, those kinds of things. And we've become overly reliant on that. The cuts that Madeline referred to, and the dollars are, 10 years ago we were spending about $110,000 on the collection, and now we're in the $60,000. I mean, and that's not accounting for inflation and the increased costs and ebooks and the extreme costs of ebooks. They are not cheaper than hardcover books. And then the technology that Madeline referred to. But the biggest area that we have used to make up for all these shortfalls is we have understaffed and underpaid our staff. And that has caught up with us. And we've hit the wall. There's just no more room. We rarely hire anyone at benefited levels, and that's been a significant cost savings. But it results in high turnover. For example, in 2019, the only staff member who got paid sick time was the director. So sick staff was good budget news. And that's not great for morale.
No.
But the salaries have really been the bigger issue. And just to give you an example, the librarians who have 4-year degrees and experience, I've got data from 2018, 2019. Our librarians were making $16.86 an hour. And in River Falls, they're at the $30 an hour mark. So, you're in the $13, $14 an hour range. That's huge. The Twin
Those
Cities.
are fast food levels.
Yeah, I know.
Really, they are. Yeah.
And in the Twin Cities, which, whether people like that or not, we can work in the Twin Cities. We're very close. Bayport is the closest library to us. It's closer than River Falls. It's closer than Roberts. And they just recently posted a position for a desk clerk, paid $19 an hour. Our clerks make $13. Big difference. Twin Cities, they make 50 to 140% more. So if we were close, if we were ballparking it, I think we could keep people, because we just work so hard to make it a great work environment, fun and supported by the management, and flexibility, everything we can do, those non-tangible benefits. But that can only get you so far when you're talking $10, $12, $13 an hour and benefits.
Right.
So we've lost 17 people in about a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
And that's out of 12 FTEs or full-time equivalents.
And can you talk a little bit about the numbers that you're serving? I think that's, people, I think sometimes people think, oh, COVID, people haven't been coming into the library, so it's no big deal. This is a perfect time for you to save money. Talk about what you've had to do during COVID and how those numbers are running up.
Sorry about that. It looks like we were closed, and certainly we were closed for a while, and then we opened partial hours. Our librarians, and we can talk a little bit about the library assistants and the aides in a different category, but they never went home. Not one day, not 1 hour. They've worked all full hours because we completely reinvented our service model. We went to the virtual library center, and in fact, we're among the very first libraries to put up a YouTube channel and start virtual programming. I don't mean in the nation, I mean in our region. And we've had, oh boy, what if I have stats as to how many programs we did last year. And we also did some Zoom programs. So those were not put on YouTube. And we had a totally different format for our teams. It's called Discord. But so all of them, like I said, never spent a day at home. And a lot of librarians across the state and country were given some paid time, you know, to not come to work because of what was going on. We didn't do that.
And the reason they were there was not just to keep them on the payroll, but to do the services, to pick up the slack, to reinvent yourselves, so to speak, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We still got all kinds of phone calls. You know, I don't think people realized how absolutely essential libraries and technologies are. But of course, you know, when COVID hit, it was tax time. People need to come into the library to do their taxes. They need to get on a computer to file for unemployment. We were still able to answer every phone call and offer people assistance. I mean, we can check out Chromebooks. Even if, you know, we were closed for a month or so, we could still help people. And that phone was ringing off the hook. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the old days, when you walk in there, the bank of computers was always full with people.
Yeah.
That was always, and that need, you found a way to meet that need regardless of the pandemic. So I
And we
think
were
that's
one of the first libraries also to do curbside, among the first to reopen. And a lot of them reopened and then closed again because we had sort of that surge. We've had 0 cases, COVID cases on our staff, and none that we've ever been informed of that had any connection to the library whatsoever. So we have safety protocols we're very comfortable with, and we did not close once we opened our doors in July.
That's
And in
impressive.
fact, we started taking bins of books to senior living centers and some daycares and doing bin delivery because they can't get here.
Yeah. You added Sundays in recently as well, and the programming. Did something change that you were able to do that, or?
Our programming numbers went from about 11,000 in 2018 to over 20,000 in 2019. We sort of restructured staff and some of our service emphasis and came up with a new planning model and had great results from that. The turnout speaks for itself. And then we did add Sundays, and we began to open at 9 as well during the week. There was the one cost we had from the programming changes. Madeline wants to talk about shifting responsibilities, how some areas were left a little dry. But I also think the leadership was really hoping that the funding would begin to resolve some of these issues, as well as making some progress with the county, which is probably another show all in of itself, but they fund us differently than they do other libraries, and they have reasons for voting that way, which we don't have to get into. But if we were reimbursed at the same levels, that would help quite a bit as well.
Okay. So looking at where you're at right now, I mean, obviously other communities face similar challenges, but because we're under this particular Hudson solution, ours is worse, right? And you're getting to the point now where what's going to happen if we don't see a change in funding?
I'm going to show you here. I think this screen is very helpful and shows some of these discrepancies here. I'm going to just move these bars. Do you see where it says regional municipalities library spending in 2019? Okay. So this shows you what other nearby cities are paying their libraries. So here, the orange bar is River Falls, serving about 16,000 people. The city pays $869,000 a year to its library, 2019. Hudson, by contrast, pays $350,000.
And serves
And,
about
and
15,000 to 16,000
well,
more.
Hudson, that's the city. The town pays about 200,000, 88 for St. Joe, and 84 for North Hudson. Again, 2019 numbers. Our service area is 30,500. So we're more than double River Falls. Chippewa Falls, Menominee, we're 3 times the size of New Richmond. So those are some pretty striking differences. If it's too expensive for Hudson to pay $350, and trust me, Hudson has been incredibly supportive, so I don't want anyone to take it the wrong way. They've been a really supportive partner. The community values the library. 2019, they're at $350, and the budget's tight. But River Falls has managed to pay $869,000. And some of that has to do with the state aid. River Falls gets a lot more state aid than Hudson, and it has to do with the property values. They have the university, which pays no property taxes. So, there are factors in there. And then you can see Rice Lake. Even the town of Rice Lake, a lot smaller, is paying $508,000 a year for their library. So what has happened has saved our taxpayers a lot of money because they are exempt from the county tax without having to pay at the levels of River Falls, Chippewa Falls, Menominee, New Richmond, etc. The problem is if the joint library doesn't make it, if this thing collapses, they're going to pay close to double when they have to pay the county tax. So really the options boil down to pay a little more, send some of your savings back to the library and keep us open, sustained, or pay nearly double and don't have a library.
When you say don't have a library, don't have a joint library or don't have a library period?
We don't know if what we've been talking about with some of these communities, like I was at St. Joe, and their discussion was if we let the library fail, joint library system fail, our taxpayers are going to pay almost double. So we probably need to fix this. No commitment. They have not voted, but that was where the discussion was going. It was very pragmatic, and the other communities are going to have to look at the same thing. And really, one of the main issues is all of our communities have levy limits. And it's not that they necessarily don't want to support the library. It's if they hit their levy limits, they can't pay more unless they cut other things. And that's the bind that our local governments are in. And so I want to make sure that I'm gracious toward the situation that they're facing, because they've been, great partners. They want to do the right thing. Most of them have voiced their understanding of the issue, their concern, that they want to do more for the library. Now, that's not everybody, but it's a really solid majority of them. And they're sometimes their hands are tied.
Is it a situation where they could raise the funding incrementally over a period of years?
It depends on how much levy capacity they have, and it's different for all of them. St. Joe has probably the most levy capacity right now because of their growth, but they're one of the smaller percent in terms of percentages of our contributors. Hudson, the city's largest, followed by the town of Hudson. And the town of Hudson surely has much less levy capacity right now, as does the village. So it's really going to be enormously challenging. The approach might be for some of them to do smaller increases over 3 or 4 or 5 years, and the ones that have more capacity to do larger increases up front and then shrink it down as we go forward. So those are some of the scenarios they'll have to consider.
And they can make the decision on this. Not everybody will go to the 30, may not go to the 30%. If one does and the others don't, how does that affect things? Is that fair?
And somebody asked that at St. Joe, like, well, what if we do this and everybody else says 2% and we give 30? How, that's simply not fair. And it's certainly a fair point. But part of the problem with the governance structure of joint libraries is a tendency to want to follow the lowest possible bar because it doesn't seem fair.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're only going to do that, then I'm only going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that's human nature, and you're trying to be fair to your community taxpayers. But the subject of the funding bears the brunt of that in terms of the quality of services and how they operate. So it could happen. And I don't know how that will affect relationships moving forward. They've been good some years, they've been bad other years, is my understanding. But so far, they've stuck together. Hopefully it will never reach a point where people decide to start pulling out because of issues like that.
Now, you've made presentations to the City of Hudson, St. Joe, you mentioned, the town of Hudson as well?
I'm going there at the end of the month, and then to North Hudson, although we've talked about it generally.
Mm-hmm. And since the city is such a large, a large portion of it, how was the reception when you made that pitch?
I was quite nervous because I know it is sticker shock. I mean, Madeline and I had sticker shock, and we work here. But they were fabulous. Everyone who spoke was aware that, we're not playing Darth Vader. We didn't just pop in and bring this dark news. They all know that there was a history here and that this has kind of been coming. The amount was a little astonishing to them. And they all voiced support that we need to keep looking at this month to month and working toward a solution. Now, nobody threw out dollar amounts. There are no immediate votes scheduled, but the feedback was really positive.
Mm-hmm. Maybe as we wind down here, you've mentioned a stakeholder retreat.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
We have been brainstorming ways about how we could move forward. And one of the most important things we have to do is talk to the community about what it is they want to see and will support. What do you want your library to be? And how do we get there? And without the community having this information, without them being able to weigh in and say, well, we think we could want to rally around legislative action, or we should do things locally, or maybe we should try to set up an unrestricted endowment. I mean, all the options out there. Without that community involvement, the solution is doomed to fail. It cannot come from staff or just our board. This is a community problem, and the solution has to be community-based. So, Stakeholder Retreat, we're going to have some patrons and community leaders all across the board come together. People will be invited to watch as well. And we will have a facilitator come in. This is going to be paid for by our foundation. And they will pull the group together, give them information, have them do breakout sessions, and come back with the ideas of what the library should be, what kinds of things they think our community will support. And then those are the action plans we will follow.
And then present those to your funders.
And we actually hoped to do this last month. And, with COVID, obviously, we just had to keep pushing it out and out and out. So we're looking July or August. And an event like this is most successful if people can network and talk. Mm-hmm. This Zoom format, especially if you're not used to it, wow, it's just not conducive to those kinds of conversations and interactions. So we think the most successful event is going to be in person, or at least mostly in person. And that's why we're delaying. The foundation they came to this very wise and astute conclusion that it's better to have a good process than a fast process.
Okay.
And some of the partners may be making decisions by then, but it's still not going to be this massive one-time fix. We still are going to need, the goal is sufficient, stable, and sustainable funding. So it's a 3-part solution, and we're going to need the community to help us.
And that's the bottom line here then, right? In
Absolutely.
terms of, and is there, with the stakeholder retreat, obviously you'll get community input. Is there anything else that you would like the community to be aware of, or to do at large that they could help with?
Certainly, coming to the Friends of the Library's bookstore, they do a remarkable job. They have this wonderful bookstore up in the building where they sell used books, and all that money comes back to us. And the Friends, or the Hudson Area Library Foundation, always takes donations. They do have an annual campaign, but they will never turn anybody away. And they have, as I said, done tremendous things for us as well. Those are great avenues. Letting your local leaders know you value and support the library. And if you haven't been here in a while, or maybe you're just not a regular library user, come and see us. We are not your mother's library. We're not your grandmother's library. We do not run around shushing children and reading books. It's not books anymore. We are Books Plus. And the technology, the programming, the lifelong learning, the cultural experiences, it is a vast community center, essentially. Public libraries are the last free, true public gathering space in our society. We're it. That's it. And we become cogs in our community, connectors, relationship builders, all kinds of partnerships, so we can deliver more to the community with less. And we love our patrons. We miss them. It's been a really hard year for us as well. Life in the building is not the same without our kids. And we like the other ones too, but I have to say, having been a person who did story time and a lot of kids programming,
Sure.
we miss our kids very much.
Before we go, if people want to continue to follow this issue or get more information or get updates on it, where should they go?
Please watch your channel, our YouTube channel, the Hudson Area Public Library YouTube channel. The newspaper, I know, is doing a story here very soon, and we are going to put a funding section on our website. We're working on that now. And then certainly the great thing with everybody going to Zoom is a lot of the communities are recording those meetings, and River Channel has them, so you can watch for updates that way as well. And follow us on Facebook, because we do try to keep updates on our social media to the extent that we can do that as well. And email us, send us messages on Facebook about, what you want, what you think, information. We're so deep in it. Madeline and I it's hard to step outside and see what other people don't see or don't understand. So those questions are really helpful for us.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both, Madeline and Shelley, for being with us and answering a tough situation, giving us the information. And if anyone has any questions, they should head to the library, right? As usual. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Meg. We really appreciate it.
That's okay.